Kill the moon, it does everything that a kill the moon can. Hello, it's Happy Times and Places. I, Toby Hadoke, that tedious bloke of the Doctor Who DVDs, gets a friend to choose a Doctor Who story and nominate their favourite things about it, then I have to commentate along and guess what those favourite things are.
Hello, Toby. And incidentally, hello to all of you at home. My name is Jon Dear. I'm a writer on TV and film, and I also co-host the Nigel Neal podcast, Bergcast. Thank you very much, Toby, for inviting me on to Happy Times and Places. And by inviting, I mean finally acquiescing to months of repeated begging on my part to be allowed on to do an episode. I'm very grateful, thank you. The episode I've chosen is the Peter Capaldi story from his first series, Kill the Moon. A potentially controversial choice for some. I remember, like many others, I was very excited when Peter Capaldi was first cast as the Doctor, and wasn't entirely happy with some of the things that were being done with the character in some of his early episodes. I think it's fine to have the Doctor as arrogant or rude. I think we've all enjoyed the scene in The Demons, episode 1, where John Pertwee goes into the pub and alienates the entire population in 5 seconds flat, and it's Joe just by being nice who gets the information out of them. But the Doctor can't understand why they won't just give him the information. I think that's vital and important in a companion Doctor dynamic. But I think they go too far with making the 12th Doctor unlikable and uncaring in his early episodes. But this is the story for me where we start to turn that round, and I first saw things that would make me enjoy the 12th Doctor and Peter Capaldi's performance. It'd go on to be an excellent Doctor, but this is where it begins for me here as well. So I hope you enjoy it, and I will speak to you later once you've watched the episode. Thanks very much.
Well, hello from me, and for those of you watching on video comes a lot later than the audio. Sorry about that. But for those on the video, for myself and Bernard, who is feeling a bit sorry for himself, because I've just been out for a short amount of time, and when I came back, there was a trail. He ran outside and drank from a puddle. I thought, God, have I not left him enough water? Oh, I'd left him plenty of water. Oh, he's going away now that I'm talking about him. Oh, Bernard. He had been into the treat cupboard that I'd left ajar. I know that because I followed a trail of detritus between here and there, and was very thirsty because he'd eaten 2 bags of treats that are normally only for special occasions. So, oh, Bernard, have you gone away because I was talking about you? I do love you. So, anyway, welcome to this edition of Happy Times and Places. You heard there from Jon Dear, who gave you Dear John, who's a lovely fellow, and I can thoroughly recommend his Quatermass podcast, Bergcast. He puts a lot of hard work into it, and he's been doing a lot to preserve and prolong the legacy of Nigel Neal, for want of a better descriptor. He's done a lot of good work, and as I record this, we're doing some events to celebrate the centenary of that great writer. However, what John didn't know when he chose this episode and recorded this, that he's not the only guest that we're going to have choosing 5 favourite things about this episode, because I reached out to somebody else, and they responded, and they are.
Hello, Toby. This is Peter Harness, writer of Kill the Moon, and thank you very much for inviting me onto your lovely podcast.
So that's interesting, and thereby hangs a tale. Peter did also give me an extra little introduction, I think, giving a bit of context and background, but that didn't download, and that's not the only glitch we've got. And I have been hanging on, and Peter has tried to help me out, but maybe we'll get to that at the end. So it's not going to be entirely straightforward, this. But anyway, what joy. So we have advocacy from a guest, and we also have a little bit of insight from the writer of this episode. But that was quite a long and stumbly introduction. I will try to be more lucid and indeed lunar as we press I Am Watching on BBC iPlayer. So as we press select or play or whatever it is you want to press in 3, 2, 1. So, I mean, I don't have access to, every single Doctor Who writer who happens to have written an episode that's being done for Happy Times and Places. But I know Peter quite well, but had at this point never met him. So I will admit some bias. He was this writer guy who I knew, did telly and stuff and was quite a big deal, who was always very complimentary about my Who's Round podcast. And I was just absolutely thrilled and flattered by his nice comments. And then, of course, he was announced as being a writer for Doctor Who, so that was even more amazing. And he then very kindly invited me to watch it with him when he was going to watch it in a hotel room in London. And unfortunately, I was gigging, I think it was a Saturday, so I was gigging at the Comedy Store. If it hadn't been the Comedy Store, I'd have probably cancelled it, but you can't not answer the summons of the Comedy Store. And so I didn't, and I sort of kick myself now, because a gig's a gig, but watching a Doctor Who episode go out with the writer, wow, that would have been amazing. And I've since got to know Peter, and he's he's a friend, and what a nice chap he is. So full disclosure there, but also I'm aware that this story is one that gets a lot of stick from people, which is going to be interesting to examine. But I'm not. Let's bat off any suggestions I'm being biased, because Peter is nice to me and I like him. I actually liked this episode when it went out, and I like it now. And anyway, this is a podcast where I accentuate the positive of everything, including time flight. So I'm not doing this just because... because it might be that the bits that Peter didn't manage to record in time for me doing this, because he's a patron of Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, which you too can be, he will listen to this before it goes on general release. So it might be that he listens to this and goes, "Oh yeah, I could." He may. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to make promises on your behalf, Peter. But we were trying to get this sorted, because he did actually send me the 2 missing bits over Christmas. But it was over Christmas, and I didn't download them, and they were on a temporary thing. And anyway, I haven't actually spoken about the episode. Do you think I'm not special? That is very clever writing, because I do find it I think certainly one of the hardest things I had as a kid was feeling sort of inconsequential, and it was very much ground into us that you didn't get ideas above your station and all of that sort of thing, which was very, very unhealthy. My grandmother was a Methodist, and the idea and a very, very decent woman, but the one thing that she gave very short shrift was the idea that you might get ideas above your station. And I think that really holds people back, or makes people feel awkward about trying to push themselves or do things. But now I find that I think the Bennett oscillator, that's a Doctor Who reference. I mean, this is Doctor Who, but you know what I mean. That's an earlier Doctor Who reference. Ark in Space, isn't it? And it's a reference to Rodney Bennett, the director. But I think this generation of parents who suffered from that, idea of, not getting too big for your boots, have now instilled it into kids of my kids' generation that it's all right to think that you're special. Now, grumpy old me kind of goes, yeah, but you're not that special, or perhaps thinking you're special when you don't even know how to make a cup of coffee. means you need to wind your neck in a little bit. So it's funny how we sort of kick back against whatever the norm is. Wonderful gimlet-eyed Hermione Norris, who I've always liked as an actress since I first saw her in an episode of Drop the Dead Donkey. And then I saw her on stage with Michael Sheen and Helen McCrory and Ian Poulsen Davis in Charlie's Aunt at the Royal Exchange. And then she was in Look Back in Anger with Michael Sheen and Claire Skinner? It was Claire Skinner, yeah. Not Helen McCrory. Helen McCrory, different connection that you don't need to know. Anyway, I like these. I love this way that the Doctor introduces himself. I think that's really witty and really funny. And he's being very, very doctorish. And she is being exactly what you want as the sort of foil to him, Hermione Norris's character, of the person who doesn't quite know how to take the Doctor and yet somehow will sense that there's an inherent need to trust him. The Doctor has to work in two different ways. Oh, she's very good, isn't she? What's the matter with the moon? See, we're straight into the story. It's put on weight. Now I have another sort of in here as well. But let's maybe get to that later. She has flanked Hermione Norris by two mighty actors, Tony Asoba, who has already been in Doctor Who in Dragonfire and Destiny of the Daleks, and by Phil Nice, who had never been in Doctor Who but could have probably had plenty of opportunities. He was in loads of stuff in the 80s, and I hadn't seen him for a while. It was lovely to see him pop up in this. Then he pops up in Torchwood as well. And I was very pleased because when the Radio Times listed the episodes, when it did a whole big preview of this season, it sort of did, guest stars, and it chose the sort of the big names but the guest stars for this were listed as Hermione Norris and Tony Asoba. So I was very pleased that Asoba, because often you see, actors from, the olden days, as it were, who were, a big deal then, come back and not do so much. As it turns out, Tony Asoba doesn't do so much, but at least somebody in the Radio Times thought he was worth mentioning, and that's quite nice if you're an actor as well. Although I'm not sure Tony would have been that bothered, because I know that when I interviewed him for Who's Round, which was before this, there were a few people I Who's Rounded who then went back into the series. I sort of said, I used to sort of, fantasy cast Doctor Who stories when I wrote them as a kid, and I'd always cast you. And I thought he might go, that's very, very lovely. And he wasn't remotely bothered at all. And I'm sure Peter gave an interview with Doctor Who magazine where he'd sort of cornered Tony and said, and I watched you in Destiny of the Daleks. And Tony was equally nonplussed. He's a very nice guy, but his way of dealing with praise was not to be as sort of effusive or sort of do the mock humility thing that a lot of other actors do. He just sort of went, okay. And this is nice casting, of course. Phil Nice, but he has a wonderful sort of. He tends to sort of pop up in sort of sketch shows and things like that. Phil Nice, he's one of those. He's sort of like a bit like Robin Driscoll and people like that who were sort of comedy support player turns, and he's got that sort of fairly hapless thing about him, which makes him good casting for this. But he ends up only with about 1 line, 2 lines, doesn't he? And yeah, so it's got, and I love all of this. I love the aliens thing. This makes Doctor Who feel very grown up to me, and sort of modern, but also. It has the feel of how I imagined the Troughton Base Under Siege stories were in my head until I saw them and realised that they weren't as dark and as cobwebby or as shadowy as I'd imagined, or as industrial even. Pardon me. But so this has a real feel of how I kind of imagined Doctor Who to be as a kid, I love the the darkness and the cobwebs, but it's a bit like Aliens as well. But no problem with that, because I remember watching Aliens and going, this is kind of what I thought Doctor Who would be like. And I remember being really on edge here, because as soon as Tony Asoba pulls away from him, I go, I hope he doesn't get killed off really quickly, and of course he does. And funny enough, I'd I'd been speaking to, I'd had an occasion to talk to Stephen Moffat, and well, very interesting. And I'd said to him, I get really annoyed when Doctor Who magazine always chooses, the polls always choose the season finale as that they always win just because they're season finale. And for example, your episodes under RTD, I thought they deserved a chance to top the polls as well. And he said, oh well, this year my season finale is not going to top the polls. Peter Harness's episode Kill the Moon will. So Stephen Moffat thought that this was going to be the most popular episode of the season, interestingly enough. And I said, I'm looking forward to that one because Tony Asoba's in it. And Stephen Moffat went, not for very long, or not much. And I thought, and I thought that's really interesting. That's very that shows a big difference between, say, him and Russell T Davies, because I think Russell T Davies, he would have gone, oh yes, lovely Tony Asoba, oh he's marvellous, we were so pleased to have him on board. But Stephen Moffat is much more focused on sort of plot and on story, and is not that sentimental about character actors popping up from the past, whereas that's sort of meat and drink to Russell T Davies. And I say no one is better than the other. I just thought that was a very. I thought the reaction that I got from one was very different from the reaction I'd have got from the other. So I love this central. I think they've got into the story very, very quickly. Hermione Norris has this wonderful doleful countenance that she's on a kind of suicide mission, and that's sort of very much in evidence, and that gives you sort of grimness and bravery, and I like all of that. I think the lighting and the flashing on and off light is rather marvelous and beautiful, and just really helps with these kind of stories. Come on then, Bernard, come on up. Good boy. Oh, Bernard's come back to watch it. Good lad. I think he's got a poorly tummy. So so I think veteran Doctor Who watchers would know that Phil Nice is probably not going to make it back. I think I would have liked these two characters to have lasted a little bit longer. I remember reading on I'll say it now because I may forget I remember after Tony Asoba had been killed off, Hermione Norris has the line saying, he was a mentor to me, blah, blah, blah. And somebody on a forum saying it would have been nice if we'd established that before he died, because then we'd have felt the loss as it happened more than as a sort of note in retrospect. And I thought, and that hadn't occurred to me at the time. I'd just been, because I watched through the lens of going, I wish that actor had more lines. I have empathy with the thespian, especially one I think deserves to be accorded respect because of their, hefty past CV. Because Tony Asoba was a very, very recognisable face in the 80s and 90s. I mean, he was in everything. Regular in Porridge. He was in. He has. I talked about this to him, and when I did the Who's round with him, he, his credit in an episode of The Professionals, and it's a big part, and he's quite a sort of stroppy character. But his character is called Handsome Negro, which just goes to show what a sobering and sometimes alarming experience watching The Professionals can be. See, this is great. And I can see why Stephen Moffat was, thinking that this would absolutely be the sort of thing that a sort of traditional Doctor Who fan would love. Spider monsters on the moon, in the darkness, picking off characters one by one, which is again another reason I think I'd have liked a bit of a gap, a bit of space between Phil Nice getting chomped and Tony Asoba, which happens very shortly, and maybe a couple of extra pieces of cannon fodder, because that to me, to put that in a story, and I'm perfectly happy. The Poseidon Adventure, anything, a group of people who've all got a character, and you work out who you like and you work out who you don't like, and gradually they get picked off one by one. And maybe throw in a little bit of a parallel to something that's going on in the world today. See, there we go. That's the end, and it's very well directed. This, and that's really horrible. And of course she gets. She's immediately imperiled and floating as well. So there's loads of stuff going on here, and it's very, very well done. It's funny. I have to be honest, I had totally forgotten about Courtney. Isn't that interesting? Because she's a sort of semi-regular, isn't she? She's in a handful of bits and bobs. That's great. The gravity stuff, and of course she squirts it, doesn't she? And that's brilliant because precocious is precocious in the proper sense of the word. Kids, kids who show themselves to be capable and who earn their place in the story by being special, although maybe the messages don't underestimate any kids. Good. All that totally buy, but and is good. But as an adult viewer, a kid who is self-possessed and capable is, whether you like it or not, does run the risk of being really, really annoying because we're adults, and even if my son is talking absolute sense to me about something that he can do that I can't, I still find that annoying because I'm old and they're young, and the only thing I've got over young people is that I know more than they do, which is actually turns up not to be true. So yeah, he was my teacher. He taught me how to fly, both given the sack on the same day. So yeah, I did. As I say, that hadn't occurred to me that information would have been nice to know beforehand, because we didn't really get to know Duke, and I was only really attached to him because he was an actor whom I liked. But I do believe that both of those characters had a bit more to do in the original script, and unfortunately, it's the way that these things go. If a character doesn't make it to the end, it's more likely that they'll lose a lot of their stuff, in the course of rewrites and edits and all sorts of things. What Are You, 35? That is, see, I think there were missteps with the Capaldi Doctor being quite so spiky and uncaring, but I think what the Moffat era has with the character of the Doctor, and Matt Smith's a bit like this in things like The Lodger as well. I think that the sort of detached alienness that they managed to make very funny is a really good quality of the Moffat era. So Matt Smith spitting out his wine in The Lodger I adore. What Are You, 35? I think is an absolutely terrific line. And of course, the central mystery of this is what has happened to the moon. Is what causes, and I feel for the episode, and I feel for Peter, who, by the way, is an extremely nice fellow and is a very, very gifted writer. And this was his idea for the story, that the moon's an egg. But now, quite often, I see, that being used as a byword for, silly ideas you shouldn't have in Doctor Who. Now, I'm not a scientist, so it didn't remotely bother me. But I have friends who've been Doctor Who fans for life, who've accepted Yeti on the London Underground, who've accepted a homicidal Bertie Bassett, who've accepted thesaurus gobbling space dynasty bitch talking to a giant brain on a plywood set. This is nicely done. That's nicely done. That's very nicely done. And she's very good. Jenna Coleman's very good. The acting is top notch. My friends who accepted all of those things in Doctor Who, particularly those of an actual scientific bent, are like, but the moon's not an egg. You could have Yeti in the underground. You could have a licorice all-sort maniac. You could have, Space O'Mara. But the moon is not an egg. And I sort of go, but but in this it is. And I don't even object to the, because of course then you go, but if it hatches, we can't destroy the moon. That would be a thing too far if you have to set up for the rest of Doctor Who that there's no moon, and of course it lays another moon. But I sort of the way I rationalised that, and people said, "Oh, but it's the same size. How can it be the same size?" Well, I just sort of rationalised it that it's sort of come out gelatinous. That's how it sort of fitted out and was smaller and sort of expanded and hardened on the outside on contact with the sky. You can rationalise that. I was fine with that. But equally, I respect my friends and I guess I'm just glad I'm not moved to distraction by that one seems to me to be particularly because even if I accept that this is a story that really divides people because the moon's not an egg, all of this stuff is absolutely fantastic. Spider creatures, astronauts getting gobbled up, this shooting on the moon looks absolutely terrific. There's loads of terrific lines in it. We've got a good guest star in It's Amniotic Fluid, and I love this piece, the Peter Capaldi piece of music. The Doctor, the triumphantly stroppy Doctor, speechifying, and these brilliant, that sort of leap of faith. That's so Doctor Who-y. See, there's so many, and I think that's one of the things I feel slightly guilty about as a Doctor Who fan, is because of this one sort of divisive element of this story, that the moon's not an egg in real life. It means that people have overlooked, I think, what else it has to offer, and the things about it that made Stephen Moffat say, I think this is going to be the one that people are going to love. My granny used to put things on Tumblr, so you can have such fun with. That's the equivalent of going, I didn't know the Beatles played classical music. Because they filmed this abroad, didn't they? And oh dear, that's the end of Phil Nice. Yeah, but yeah, he ends up in the first episode of Torchwood Miracle Day. But and they've had good use out of these spacesuits, haven't they? And oh dear, I had totally forgotten about that. So again, that we're however many minutes we are in, and that it's very very well structured, this script, because that bit of seismic disturbance, which is explained within the plot, has lost us our spaceship home. And that's a nice I gave a tenner lady for Secret Santa, but that's the clash of the mundane. I can't call the secretary because she hates me, and we're doing it from a base on the moon. And you can't put pictures of me online again, and that's nice as well. It's very witty. I'm not. How do we feel? I don't know how I feel about. I don't think I was over the moon about the sort of anchoring of the Doctor's travels with Coal Hill School. That's. And I know they sort of break that now, and I guess they wanted. I don't know. It's something very much of the modern show, but I suppose they did it with Sarah Jane, didn't they? Is that she was sort of based on Earth, but the Doctor had to keep persuading her to go with him. But I think I was brought up on Doctor Who that when you're a companion of Doctor Who, it's basically because you got into time and space and you can't get home, and then eventually when you do get home, you leave and go home. That sort of that going back and forth by sort of choice. I don't know. It seems less of a wild adventure there, because then you go and sleep in your own bed. Well, yeah, I don't know. But that's just a personal preference. I don't think. I think there are storytelling advantages to having, to having it as it is here, and particularly in the way that they sort of rent this relationship asunder, and especially this great argument that they have at the end of this episode. I love his delivery that I just talked over, of when he says the moon's an egg, and the look on his face. He's such a good actor. And I think, and there's something in that performance that's almost daring him and us to go, this is absolutely mental. I think it's a pitch perfect delivery of that batshit crazy concept that kind of makes you go, yeah. So it knows it's asking us to believe something quite extraordinary, but if there's any program that can ask you to go, yeah, come on, we have shop window dummies come to life, we have plastic daffodils that suffocate you, we have a possible scenario where the moon's an egg, and the moon does look like an egg. Why not? And that's a beautiful. I love that visual as well, of the sort of dragon, the dragon inside the egg, and that's a lovely hologram effect that they have. And this is very interesting because this is very of the time, isn't it? The idea that they open the choice up to the general public. Now, interestingly, at the time, I'm sorry, interesting is not what I am when I say interesting a lot. The thing that this communicated to me when the episode was broadcast was that this was very much echoing the idea of television programs that entrusted the public with making a decision that then led to the idea that referenda were the way of doing politics, and the referendum on Brexit, which caused a great schism in this country and in this society, and continues to have that argument between people that it's how do you put this? I had the conversation with my son who was sort of saying, you shouldn't put things to the general public because people aren't well informed and they don't know things. And I was like, but that's a really elitist view. And if you're saying that, what you're saying is, well, I should be making the decisions because I read the right newspapers. And that is not as liberal a view as you might think it is, son. Now, I am, I was a Remainer, and I'm as sort of typically sort of liberal lefty as you would think. But I'm also acutely aware that in the culture war that is raging, people of my political persuasion do not necessarily come across well when they say things like, oh, well, the referendum results was essentially wrong because all the people that voted a different way from me were mistaken at best or are stupid at worst. And you go, well, hang on. But then you go, but that's why we don't have referendums on referenda on everything, because are the general public, and I would include myself in this, clued up enough in the mechanics and the realities to make that decision? Or is that why we have the political system where we do, where it's people's jobs to be in all of that to make the best decisions on behalf of everybody else? And this, what I thought, this tackled very interestingly was that idea of going, well, we'll. And, it's slightly cheated at the beginning because you've got that pre-credits where they're talking about an innocent life. And you think, oh, are they talking about Courtney? That's a nice little misdirect because you have that pre-credits with Jenna Coleman and Courtney and Clara and Courtney. I forgot Clara's name then. That's terrible. I can tell you the name of an extra in a 1960s story, and I forgot Clara's name because I'm getting very old. I've got spiders and cobwebs in my head. And Yes, this I'm remembering now. It's not just the moon in the egg that's controversial, is it? Of course, it's the Doctor going away and going, well, I'm going to leave you to it. So he leaves them to it. What a brat. She's very good. She's very a good, terse and earthy character, Hermione Norris. And these spider special effects, I think, are absolutely terrific. And I'm watching it on a big screen. It looks absolutely lovely. But this idea that the Doctor defers to us to say humanity has to make its own decision, but then they do the X Factor, don't they? They do the right. Everybody call in, turn your lights on, turn your lights off, whatever. But then they ignore the result, and you go. And so I was much more sort of drawn to that element of the story, and I thought that was very bold. But it is. Is it the liberal elite going? Is Clara basically some Guardian reading Islington dweller going, well, yes, they've decided, but they're completely wrong. And is the writer on her side? You know, I think it's. You know, I think that opens up some nice, interesting questions that I didn't really consider the whole. You know, whether it's pro-choice or not. Maybe that's just because I'm an awful man, and I didn't think about the idea of. I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and they gave me a reading of it that made me go, "Oh, I hadn't considered it being like that at all." But now I kind of see where you're coming from. But that's what I think makes, because again, I think sometimes now when a story posits different ideas, we're very keen to go, oh, the writer thinks that and therefore they're brilliant or they're awful. But of course, the best writing throws those things in there and makes you think about them. And just because a writer makes a character do something, that doesn't necessarily mean that's what the writer would do. It's what makes it most dramatic or most interesting. And I think a story that does all of those things is very valuable, and very stimulating. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the man, Doctor Who, goes away and leaves the three women to decide what to do with the with the baby in the egg. Yeah, that's nice as well. That's a brilliant riposte to the kind of going, well, I'm not your teacher, I'm your friend. No, I'm going to call you Miss. I like that. I'd forgotten about it. I can tell by your haircut. That's very good. Lots of nice little jokes in here. I'd forgotten about ground control. So I was just trying to remember what my friend's reading. It may have even been one of my kids. Anyway, so yeah. So here's the moral dilemma. Do yes. So that's the dilemma. If we let it hatch, but of course they let it hatch and it's absolutely fine. So I don't. Oh yeah, and it's everyone switching the lights on and off, isn't it? But yeah, she totally ignores the result of the referendum, and lets the creature live anyway. And the creature lives, the creature hatches, and there are no bad consequences. Now, somebody also said, well, if that happened to the moon, tides would do this and that would do that. Well, if the TARDIS dragged 6 planets back, as it does in Journey's End, all sorts of terrible things would happen. But for that visual and for that moment of triumph and for that conclusion of that great story. You go, well, yeah, I know, but actually, on most, most stories, everybody's, lungs would collapse, or they wouldn't be able to breathe, or the planet they land on would be uninhabitable and they'd burn to a crisp. I think you either go for it or you don't. But by the same token, yes, I understand that you want the story to at least make some efforts to be plausible. But I think this is done with a lot of sincerity and thoughtfulness. I think it's quite a philosophical story. I can also understand why people are a bit cross that the Doctor vanishes, but isn't that the Doctor in it enabling, trusting? He does it quite harshly, but he's trusting them to make the right decision. This is the same Doctor that threw Ace into the mire to see if she would learn for herself. There's it's the Rethian educational Doctor, even though he's his methodology is not touchy feely. I love this piece of music. And you really thought they were going to do it. I think the misdirects and the script really paints everybody into a corner. That the idea of a noble death as well is very interesting. She's got her eye on history. But and I think this. I love this. Look at that. That's an absolutely fantastic effect. And I remember watching this go, but how? Hang on. But there's a moon. How do we get back? You really don't know where the story is going to take you. And I love this visual of them on the beach. And I love that special effect. I think that's absolutely gorgeous. Beautifully shot. It's just a harmless dragon. Yeah. So is that the thrust of this baby, basically? Ignore democracy. Now I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I think that's interesting. But I know Peter is a democratic kind of guy, but I love this bit. I love because there's a real power and passion. Look, and the way that he does that, and I love this galloping piece of music. And this is the sort of stuff that you hire an actor like Capaldi for. He's got such sort of Shakespearean depth, and you can really trust him to do that. And I think this stuff will age really, really well. He's got and this is where having an older Doctor helps as well. Although Tom Baker's not that old when he's the Doctor, but it's that gravitas as well. And he's got a brilliant face. Oh, do you know what? I'm missing Peter Capaldi. I think I need to watch a lot of Peter Capaldi again because he's such a fine actor. And I was slightly nonplussed, I think, by some of the decisions that were made when his Doctor launched. I remember being quite surprised by some of the things that happened. But that's not to take away from him as an absolutely brilliant actor. And here we go. It laid a new egg. Now, you see, I can see the sort of it sort of the surface bobbling. Yeah, I see it sort of coming out as quite sort of soft and pliable, and it hardening on the outside and having expanded as it popped out. But I'm aware that that's me being very generous to it. But I didn't feel I was having to do mental gymnastics in order to feel that was a thing. And I like Lundvik. I like her dynamic with the Doctor, and I think Hermione Norris is laudably, terse and grounded, and principled. I think it's a really nice performance that I think really helps with the dynamic in the episode. And this is great because he knows there's something going on here, but he doesn't know as much as he thinks he does. And she is absolutely fantastic. Yeah. I find this sort of stuff really pushes my buttons. Two really good actors, and yeah, Smash You So Hard to Regenerate. It's really, and we haven't really had much like this in Doctor Who. I know Ace and the Doctor have that great showdown in Curse of Fenric. When she gets really cross with him. But he's he's so arrogant here. And you're totally with her. She's totally, you can only take the sort of alien glibness for so long, and that's the danger that the Doctor runs with having such a thirst for adventure. You get glib and blasé about some terrible things, and he thinks he's so bloody smart. The idea that he's sort of patronising us is I think really interesting, and it's a really interesting comment on the character. And she's so good and so such a good identification figure that you're kind of with her. And she does this so well. I think this is, yeah. Let's take the stabilizers off my bike. Oh yes. Oh, yeah. This is good drama. This is good stuff. And it's a wake up call to him. I think this scene is really, really good, to the extent I haven't really said anything coherent about it, because I think it just speaks for itself. Really nicely written. You what's good about good drama is that you actually understand where both of them are coming from. You can see both people's point of view, and they both act it so well, and it's therefore desperately sad because they're both right about something that is true and therefore a bit heartbreaking. And she's so good, isn't she? And I don't think I'd seen her in it because I didn't watch Emmerdale, so I didn't really know her at all. Danny Pink. I like Danny Pink. I wish he hadn't ended up as a run over crossing the road and then ends up as a Cyberman after we found out he's killed a child. Yeah, there's some stuff in this series that, as I remind myself of what happened in it, I go, oh yeah, I'd forgotten about those bits. And I really like Samuel Anderson. I think he's got a really sort of soft-eyed charisma. And this is the advantage, because obviously we've dispensed with the Moon story a while ago now, but this is the advantage of having this base in Coal Hill School, is that you can sort of just allow a little more space for character development, different dynamics. Him coming in at the end of this episode, helps her to assimilate what she's done, but she's still got an eye on. I had a really bad day. That's nice. That's nice and economical, and we discover what that is later. And I think you're sort of half expecting the Doctor to come back because of the way that we know that Doctor Who works. You're sort of half expecting him to come back and them to go, oh, sorry. But instead, no, she does that very real thing as she comes home and she opens a bottle of wine. And there's the moon. And the moon's a beautiful thing, isn't it? It's and yeah, so you go, oh, okay. The Doctor's not come back. So whilst the episode is over, that it's going to reverberate for the characters. And she's barely in it. Is she in it at all next week? No, I don't think she is. Fantastic cast. And Jamie Matheson, who wrote Mummy on the Orient Express, I've known for years. But that's another story. We can have too many bits of blooming name dropping. I don't know how interesting I was on that. It's interesting. I think I was working out a lot of my feelings, and I'm still not sure where I am on the. When I was talking to whoever I was talking to about, whether it's pro-choice or not, whoever it was spoke to me much more eloquently about that aspect of the story. So I think I've come up short there. But as I say, it wasn't something that particularly hit me. I was hit much more by the overturning a referendum side of things, because perhaps that was more present in my mind at the time. But I think that is all stuff that is very interesting, which means I think it is a much more interesting and deliberately thought-provoking story than it's the one where the moon's an egg sort of dismissiveness sometimes comes. So I have to choose 5 things. John has chosen 5 things. Peter has also chosen 5 things, but the 4th one didn't download. And I told him this, and we tried again, and it didn't work again. So then over Christmas, he re-recorded the 4th thing and sent it to me in an email. And I just thought it was there on the email, and it was Christmas. So then when I went to download it, it was a few weeks later, and it wasn't there on the email. It was on a link to a temporary housing somewhere on the internet. And by the very way that I'm describing this, you will see that I don't really know what I'm doing. So anyway, it was there and it's not. So Peter has actually done it for me twice. The first when it didn't download just seemed to be a glitch, a ghost in the machine. The second time it was because I was daft or incompetent, and I asked, and I did mention that to Peter. And he said, "Oh yeah, I'll do it again." And I thought, "Oh God, I was just hoping you'd have it on your phone and could re-upload it." And then time has run away, and he hasn't been able to. Well, I don't know. He's probably forgotten, but you can only bother people so many times. It may be that he sends me an email or something after I've recorded this, and I'll just have to add it in the post-credit sequence, because those of you that stop Happy Times and Places as I'm reading out the credits, the things you miss after the credits, but besides the plugging of my Patreon page and various other things, there's gold in them there hills. So, and John has done me a very nice job. He's done me lovely sort of visuals to accompany his video thoughts. So again, they'll be worth checking out on the YouTube version of this, which will come out several centuries after the audio, because the audio is much easier put together, and more of you listen to the audio than watch the videos, and that's just the best way I can marshal my time. I'm so sorry. So Happy Times and Places Kill the Moon. So I need to choose my 5 favourite things. Well, the base under siege stuff, the aliensy stuff, the enclosed space, shadows, lights in their helmets, scuttling creatures, that whole stuff. Somehow very modern, and yet somehow reminiscent of everything I think Doctor Who has always been, even though it actually hasn't. So just that whole thing I love. I think that's great. I love Peter Capaldi's sticking his head up, doing that wonderful speech, that accompanying music. So that the speech on the beach. Well, it's a shame, because I would like to choose that piece of music as well as an individual bit, but it's sort of wrapped up in all of those things. I think the line about Courtney being 35, I just think is really funny. and that to me is, as I say, when the sort of spiky, slightly alien and detached Doctor of this era works very much at his best, where it's used for great comic effect. It still has the same, his mind doesn't quite work the same as ours, and he's not quite on our wavelength, but it does it in a witty and enjoyable way. I do like. I just think because it's food for thought, and because it was very much of the time, you know, the throwing it open to the public, I think was a, you know, very of the moment. It throws up that moral dilemma of you come out of the episode and go, I'm still not sure whether I approve of them overriding the decision of the majority. Is that, is that morally the right step? Do you go, well, actually, no, people are wrong. People are uninformed. They've made the wrong decision. They're guided by the wrong motives. But then what does that make you? And I'm fascinated by that idea of imposed liberalism, which is, of course, an oxymoron. And I find that a fascinating subject, and I think, you know, the story raises that, and it doesn't necessarily have an answer to it, but I think it really makes you think about it. And the argument in the TARDIS at the end, I think, is terrific. Oh, but then what about? I wanted to say Tony Asobo. I wanted to say Hermione Norris, who I think is great, but it's obvious for me to choose actors. Now, obviously, these two probably now, because both of them know me, will now go, and of course, Toby, you're bound to choose an actor, so Hermione Norris, and then I'll feel guilty for not choosing her. I'll feel even more guilty if Peter goes, and Tony Asobo being, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I told him that, and he was really happy, and but I think the argument in the TARDIS is very nicely written, and I think it's brilliantly acted. So those are the things: the speech on the beach, the base under CG, the line about her being 35, the whole, you know, dilemma of trusting the public, and the argument in the TARDIS. With honourable mentions, I like the fact that Courtney worked out how to kill the spider because she realised that her, you know, the disinfectant would act on it because it's not a spider, it's a virus or whatever. It's bacteria. And an honourable mention to Hermione Norris / the guest cast, because they're both things I enjoyed as well. So let's see how close we are. Oh, and then the moon's surface too. I love the depiction of the moon's surface. So lots in there. I wonder if am I going to retract the phoning in and replacing it for something else? Because I'm still not sure how I feel about that. But isn't that the whole point? That it's made me think, and it makes me wrestle with that, so that I do like it. Oh, yeah, we'll leave it at that. I'm not going to win anyway, so there's no point wasting time trying to. So, what's John's first thing?
Well, I hope you all enjoyed the episode, and if it's something that you have watched before and haven't enjoyed it, I hope some of Toby's comments gave you a new sense of appreciation for it as well. My first favourite thing about Kill the Moon is the stupid dancing the Doctor does when he first meets the crew on the moon. There's lots of little lighter moments in early exchanges in this episode. The Doctor not understanding children, or the JNT meta joke. But I think it builds nicely with the use of the yo-yo as a gravity check, and Tom Baker references there, to having the Doctor talk about something like killing children, in the order in which will kill them, all the while doing sort of stupid moves and dances while he does the very serious thing of essentially taking gravity readings, and it's played and written and performed perfectly, and that brings home that Capaldi is the Doctor. So in that wonderfully incongruous way, my first favourite thing about Kill the Moon is the Doctor doing the stupid moving / dancing while talking about generally horrific things.
Yeah, no, you see, I think I was gassing on about how I knew Peter Harness and making it very much about me. And I was looking at that and going, I should be talking about this, because I'd forgot it is a really, really good moment. And it speaks to the rest of the episode as well, because of the things that he's talking about. And I missed it to give you context. That's a great thing about Kill the Moon and a bad thing about me and this. Good choice, John. Now, why don't I now choose one of Peter's things? Although, of course, there's no reason why their favourite things should be in the same order. But what is Peter's number one thing?
Number one, Jenna Coleman. I think Jenna Coleman is a fantastic actress. I think that people noticed that after she'd been on the show a little time, and that she was given increasingly challenging and exciting things to do. And I think all of that is beginning to flower by the time she gets together with Capaldi's Doctor. She's got a lot of different things to do in this episode. She's got a lot of big scenes to carry, and she carries them all fantastically. I think it's a brilliant performance, and I think that perhaps I'm biased, but I don't care if I am. She becomes one of the best companions the Doctor's had, I think, and that relationship between the two of them, I think, will be seen as a classic relationship. I think she's incredibly powerful here. I love the character of Clara, and I love Jenna's performance.
Yeah, she is. She's absolutely brilliant. And it's interesting. I need to stop saying interesting. Because I was also very amused when, the nation all went, oh, blooming Clara, when she appears at the end of Capaldi's time in Twice Upon a Time. So what happened there? Because I remember being quite amused, rather than rushing to her defence, of being quite amused that was the public's or Doctor Who fans' reaction. Because I suppose it is quite funny that's not what was being aimed for, but what was and that there must therefore be some element of truth in it. Did she overstay her welcome? Did they not write her out correctly? I don't know, because in isolation there, and thinking back to how I felt at the time, it's an absolutely brilliant performance. She is really good. She's a really good character. She's got a great dynamic with the Doctor. So I wonder what went wrong. I wasn't bloody Clara when she appeared at the end of Twice Upon a Time, but I could see what that response amused me. So I was sympathetic to it in a way, even though it's not in my way of thinking to be like that. Anyway, she is great in that episode, and as Peter says, she rises to the challenge. She gets a lot of emotional heft to do, but she's also really perky and really funny, and she holds her own. She's terrific. Great casting. Okay, John's number two.
My second favourite thing about Kill the Moon is that it's a bit Doctor Who does horror properly. Good tea time terror, maybe not for tots, but it's a younger tots, but it's good and scary and fun. I know Peter Harness was apparently told by Stephen Moffat to Hinchliff the hell out of the episode, and I think I think he succeeds. It's it's a shame we lose the supporting cast fairly early on, particularly if you enjoy spotting Tony Asoba in his previous stories. But we've not got much time, and you work with what you've got. I wonder if Peter Harness has seen Apollo 18, a slightly flat found footage horror film with set on the moon and previously unreleased recordings of an Apollo mission that NASA denies. Nothing particularly plot-wise is stolen, but it does concern spider creatures on the moon. And that particular image that you have when you see all the spiders moving towards the base, I wondered if Peter Harness had seen that and thought that's a good image. I can make something with that image. I can build a Doctor Who story that contains that image. So if you have been told to Hinchcliffe or indeed Holmes the hell out of an episode, it's good to have a good idea that you can, frankly, do something with, run it through the Doctor Who ringer, and make something very, very good out of it. So my second favorite thing is it's a proper horror story, and all the better for it.
I think I will allow myself a point for that, because that's sort of what I alluded to with the shadows and the lights and the base under siege and all of that. I'm going to allow myself. And also that enabled me to gather my thoughts, because I was desperate to talk about this pro-life element. I think I might have been talking to my son about it, and I was saying, oh, my friend wrote that episode, and I said, well, I said, I like that episode, but some fans don't, and this is why. And it was my son, I'm sure, that said, oh, but that's the episode that some people at school were saying is pro-life. And I went, oh, explain that. Because, of course, Lundvik is going to abort the baby, basically, isn't she? She's going to, so yes, of course it can be. I don't know why I struggled to think of this. I think it's because I'm watching and broadcasting and thinking at the same time. And sometimes I can't do three things at once. I'm sorry, everybody. It's going to take me a while to catch up. But, and because I'm not as familiar with these episodes as the ones I've seen 100 million times and could tell you, what the third guard on the left's favourite football team is. But anyway, I've got there eventually. Of course, it's the reading that it is pro-life is that Lundvik wants to abort the baby dragon in order that everybody around it has a chance of survival / life, whatever. And the story says, no, don't kill the unborn child, because that would be bad. And look, the child is born and everything's fine anyway. And a reading of that could be that it is anti-abortion. I can see that as a perfectly legitimate reading. But I just sort of read it as pro-life in that it is pro-life. It is about giving life a chance. Now, the abortion argument is slightly difficult, and I feel sort of awkward proselytizing too much because I'm a man. But the reason I didn't perhaps see this as close parallels to the issue of abortion in our society as we have it at the moment, and it's a much bigger issue in America than it is here. I think the pro-life voices in the UK are very much seen on the fringes, but I know it's a much livelier debate in Ireland and in the States. But of course, because it becomes the argument about a woman's autonomy over her own body, and that I don't see as getting anything in the way of the storytelling of Kill the Moon. So therefore, it's even though it's a very, very similar set of circumstances in many ways, i.e., do we stop this creature being born, and is that okay to do that? the moon is not inside a woman's body, so therefore there's not another person's, physical autonomy to override, if you like, which is a big part of the abortion debate that there's no sort of equivalence of in Kill the Moon. But I can see why some people may see it as being pro-life. I've never discussed that with Peter. I wonder if he'll have something interesting to say about it. But also, I'm a terribly liberal. I can understand where some of the pro-life, and because a lot of it gets dressed, talked about in very religious terms, which I know is a big turn-off for atheists, and I'm an atheist myself. But the argument about what state a fetus is in at the point where it can still be aborted, I think is one we don't particularly like to have. That I can understand, where the people making that argument are coming from, even though my default is to go, you can't have the state tell a woman what to do with her body. But then I can understand people who go, well, we shouldn't have the state allowing something that doesn't, that can't defend itself, but be allowed to continue to which, if uninterrupted, would definitely result in a life. It's a really tricky one. So again, that it's a story that provokes that sort of debate, even if it takes me a while to formulate what I'm saying about it, and I've been very kind of slow on the uptake with. I still think, that's fertile ground. But I've seen it, I've seen it a few times, and I've thought about the episode. But the sort of pro-life or not aspect does not leap out to me in the way that it clearly does to others. What's Peter's number 2 thing?
Number 2 is the character of Courtney Woods, as played by Ellis George. I remember reading The Caretaker, and I was after that kind of character for Kill the Moon. I thought Clara should take one of her pupils with her, and so I asked if I could borrow Courtney because she was so interesting in that episode, and I think she's lovely in this as a kind of mini companion. I think Ellis George plays her in a very tender and believable and funny way, and she really takes her place as one of the lead characters. And I did write her, in fact, to come back in the Zygon short story and explain why, deservedly, in my opinion, she later goes on to become president of the United States. Sadly, we lost that for reasons of time, but maybe I'll explain it one day. But I think she really earns her place in this episode, putting things on Tumblr, which Hermione Norris's grandmother clearly used and went out of fashion as quickly as we thought it might do. Asking the doctor if he's got any games. I love that the interplay between Peter Capaldi and Courtney. I think she's a lovely character. So Courtney Woods, number 2.
Yeah, and I think Peter puts that very well, and I think I alluded to it, is that I mean, as an adult, I think I automatically take a step back from sort of younger characters who are audience identifiers, just because I'm getting old and I've got kids and I don't need kids to teach me things, because all I have is that all I have over kids is that I know more than them. But I think that plays with that, and that's where that lovely dynamic comes. And she does play the part very well, and she's got some terrific lines, and she serves a very useful purpose in the story. So I wonder why she's sort of slightly forgotten about now, because I do think I'd kind of, only really half remembered that she's in, she's actually quite a major character, not just in one episode. And thanks for that insight, Peter, that she was almost in the Zygon one. She could always still come back, of course. Okay, well, I've got one of Jon's and none of Peter's as we get to the halfway mark of my guests' choices. So this is going to be Jon's choice number 3.
My third favourite thing about Kill the Moon is Ellis George as Courtney. Not her first appearance, and not the first time a younger character features in an episode of Doctor Who, but I don't think either have been better than this moment. It's often a danger having a young actor, particularly a young character in Doctor Who. It's often the scrappy-do problem that they become annoying to a lot of the audience, thinking of Nightmare and Silver. Yeah, but anyway, this is a positive Doctor Who podcast, and Ellis George is brilliant as Courtney, the person who genuinely wants to learn, but on her terms. Both the Doctor and Clara have to understand the world through her eyes. It's impossible how you would react in such a fantastical situation, but so much of Doctor Who is like that, and I think she does it incredibly well. It's important that she's the first one to kill one of the spider creatures. You show the child literally destroying stuff of nightmares, and she's included in the terrible ramifications for the decision at the end. And despite the fact that lots of questionable reasons whether you get post-traumatic stress disorder from your encounters if you were these characters in Doctor Who, if you take it on its own terms as an entertainment show, I think this is the best example of a character who is essentially a child being both excellent as a character in their own right and being perfectly played. So my third favourite thing about Kill the Moon is Ellis George as Courtney Woods.
Oh, now something's happened I hadn't anticipated, is that Jon and Peter are choosing the same things. Oh no, wouldn't this be awful if it turns out that they actually have more in common? This is like Mr. and Mrs., Mr. and Mr. and Mr. And I'm suddenly finding myself, well, it's Rita, Sue and Bob too, but no, because they all got together. But anyway, I'm finding myself getting pushed onto the outside. Wouldn't it be awesome? Jon and Peter sitting in a tree, KASSING. So yeah, it could be that actually Jon and Peter end up having more things in common in their choices than me. I now am regretting not choosing Ellis George, but that speaks to, interestingly, my own prejudices going into it, maybe, because I acknowledge that I thought she was great. I really like the fact that she's the first one to kill the spider bacteria things, and through the application of intelligence, and it's great. It's saying don't underestimate kids, empower kids, enable them to reach for the stars, even if that means putting them in mortal peril. All that great stuff that speaks to our first contact and experience with Doctor Who. And yet I never even considered choosing. I nearly chose, yes, the moment where she killed the spider, but I never considered choosing her. And I think, as I say, that speaks to my own prejudice going into it. Not that I don't like what she did, but I wouldn't. There was no way that I was going to choose her as a thing, because there was some sort of mental block there, because it's a younger character, which I think proves why it's important that we should try and do those things well, because as Jon has suggested, and Peter in complimenting the actress Ellis George, that actually, those, we know how bad such characters can be, and American sci-fi is littered with them. So actually, when it's done so well, and the writing is so nice, and the banter and the interaction, and what it makes the Doctor do, and how Peter Capaldi acts in response, and actually the importance that she serves to the theme of the story and everything, why didn't I choose her? Because she could have easily derailed it if she'd been written and acted less well. So yeah, I should have chosen Ellis George and Courtney, and I didn't. But it's too late now. What is Peter's third thing?
Number 3 is the big punch-up between Doctor Who and Clara at the end of the episode. I think that this season was an experiment in doing the kind of thing that they always wanted to do with Colin Baker's Doctor, which is start him harsh and then gradually strip away the layers until mellowing him. And I think that this probably works in a way that it didn't work with Colin Baker's Doctor, because I think a lot of effort went into planning it. And I think there was always going to be a pivot point between Clara and the Doctor when her response to his rather brusque and alien new persona reached a crisis, and it just so happened that it was in Kill the Moon, and really the episode is leading up to this scene at the end. I think it's very nice that she tears the strip off the Doctor, because he hasn't behaved very well. When I watched it with my son this afternoon, he was horrified that the Doctor chose to bugger off halfway through. And I think that's a natural reaction to it. She calls him out on it. She calls him out on being patronising. She calls him out on not committing and not helping. And I think it's a pivot point in their relationship, and it's a turning point for Capaldi's Doctor, who begins to mellow from this point onwards. And I think both Jenna and Peter play the scene brilliantly, and I think it's a really moving and intense end to the episode. So it's the punch up at the end.
Yeah, well, I chose that, and I think that is really interesting about how, it was all part of a plan, and also that, the thing that the Doctor does that appalls us. And I've got a couple of old school friends who say, yeah, but that's appalling that the Doctor did that. And you go, yeah, and that's what the writer's saying. It's not saying this is how that the Doctor shouldn't behave like that. The writer's going, yeah, I know that's the point of the story, is that the Doctor behaves in a way that he shouldn't, because a character who always behaves in the way that they should is surely predictable and boring. So it's not a misunderstanding of the Doctor. It's a deliberate placing of the Doctor into a situation that he calls wrongly, and that's very interesting. And it leads to that scene, which is brilliant. And I remember watching it at the time, going, "Whoa, I've never seen anything quite so real." I don't think. Sort of, as a sort of coda to a story that really sucker punches the Doctor and has real consequences for him because of the way that he's, behaved, to get them to the conclusion where they've prospered and succeeded. But the companion goes, no, she sends Courtney out and there's sort of shuts the door and goes, now you listen. And I think I think it's really well placed and built up to as well. And yeah, as Peter says, it's beautifully done by the pair of them. So that means I now have a foot in each camp. So we're back to Rita, Sue and Bob 2, which is not something I'm very comfortable with, but I've started. So now here's John's number 4.
My fourth favourite thing about Kill the Moon is reneging on the decision by humanity to kill the creature. The idea that the decision is too big, and the Doctor won't make it. It's too big for a non-human to make it. And isn't Hermione Norris's prat brilliant when he just buggers off in the TARDIS halfway through? But that you can't make it yourself, so you very quickly get the entire planet Earth to have a quick referendum, and it's not subtle that planet Earth has a referendum and people look at it and go, that decision's ridiculous, I'm not doing it, I'm doing the opposite because it's what I feel was right. But you didn't want to do that initially. You wanted the responsibility to be to be shared amongst the population. But once you realise you disagree with that responsibility, you now feel you have the power and the strength to ignore it and do what you think is right. And that's a good positive message for the climax of a Doctor Who story. Okay, then we have the moon is an egg, which some people are really upset about, but because it's ridiculous. And yes, it is absolutely ridiculous. But if you want to pick holes in bits of Doctor Who because you think they're ridiculous, then you have no business in being a Doctor Who fan. So my fourth favourite thing about Kill the Moon is the idea that you make a decision based on what you believe is the right thing to do, no matter who you are, whether you're a school teacher, a schoolgirl, or a shuttle captain. That even if you want to hive the decision off to a far greater number of people, and you believe when it comes back that decision is wrong, you do with what you believe is right. I think that's a very positive thing.
Oh, I like John's articulation and reading of that, which is better than mine. I mused, I think, on the contradictions that throws up. John took it as an empowering and an enabling, and indeed a just thing. He took the end game of it and saw it through, and I'm convinced by that. So interestingly, I've put my opinion onto the shoulders of somebody else. He's clarified my opinion, shot it back to me, and I've agreed. So I've actually done the opposite of what he says, but I in terms of what we're doing about this. But I just think because he explained it better than me. I think Jon and Peter are on slightly better form than me tonight. So I'm sorry about that, everybody, and indeed Kill the Moon. So thank goodness for Jon and Peter, except we don't have Peter's fourth thing. It hasn't downloaded twice. So where that leaves us, I don't know. Because the rules of the game don't cover having the writer lobbing in observations from the side anyway. But I mean, Jon chose the basically the referendum, and I chose that as food for thought. So I think Jon and I are standing at 2-2. So if Jon's last one is one of mine, I'm going to win this one, which will make up for the fact that my commentary, I think, missed some vital points, had a lot of beating around the bush and unformulated arguments, and a lot of context and name dropping that probably wasn't much use to anybody. I didn't think I was name dropping. I thought I was being useful and insightful and informative, but as I look back now, I feel I did you a disservice. Anyway, Jon's fifth thing then, and then we'll do Peter's fifth thing. Or should we do Peter's fifth thing? We'll do Peter's fifth thing because we heard from Jon last, and because that means we see what Jon does last, and that we'll see whether I've won or not. So we didn't have a fourth thing from Peter, so I don't know what that is. But the fifth thing from Peter is...
Number 5, it has to be the moon's an egg. The moon's an egg. I love the way that he delivers that, knowing how silly it is and knowing how desperately it's going to annoy many people probably. The moon is an egg. It's fine. It's great. Why not? It's the funnest thing about the episode. The moon is an egg. Get over it.
And I do love Capaldi's delivery of that line, because it is quite meta. He is sort of daring you to go, I think this is absurd, but I'm kind of high on it as well, and I'm glad, because that's clearly sort of what the writer is going. Look, this is batshit, but go with it. Come on. And I love the fact that Peter is not apologetic about it. The moon's an egg. So thank you to Peter for his insights. He really is a very fascinating and intelligent fellow, but also a very, very lovely man. And very kind of him to give his time, and twice, because he's had to go to a bit of effort to do these, and they didn't quite work, and blah de blah de blah. And he's a listener to this work. But as I say, I haven't been. Now, in fact, I think I've actually been slightly harder on the episode because I was conscious of not wanting to suck up to him. Which is interesting. So there's a concern with me there going, oh, well, I don't want to be seen to be being obsequious, rather than just going, enjoy it, revel in enjoying it, and don't worry if people judge you for enjoying a thing. But it's almost like you have to get a bit defensive, going, yeah, I did enjoy that. You don't have to, well, shouldn't have to defend oneself for enjoying something. Oh, it's so funny. And this all talks back to that, worrying about what other people think, and throwing your self-confidence into the it dependent on it being on the opinion of others, which it absolutely shouldn't at all. There should be enough within yourself, and that's all part of the lesson of this episode, and in fact I think of the essence of Doctor Who, and it's clearly a lesson I still fail to live by or learn from in my everyday actions. That's the eternal tragedy. It's not that you keep making the same mistakes, it's that you're aware of the mistakes that you make, and then you keep making them, and then you berate yourself because you know what mistake it was you were making. So why do you still make it? Oh dear. And that is more ridiculous. The fact that one makes the same mistakes over and over again, even though one knows what those mistakes are. That is more ridiculous than the moon being an egg. What's John's fifth thing? Let's see if I can win. Come on, John. Choose one of the things I chose.
And my bonus thing about Kill the Moon is something that I don't think anyone will get, because it's so very personal. Kill the Moon's not the first Doctor Who story I've seen for the first time abroad. That was The Rebel Flesh, which I saw in Barcelona, not the planet Barcelona, the place Barcelona. But then I was just watching a feed of BBC One, which they had on in the hotel. When I watched Kill the Moon, I was on my honeymoon in New England, and I was staying in Portland, Maine at the time, and they had BBC America. So for the first time, I watched Doctor Who on BBC America, on a channel that isn't available in the UK. So I thought, I know American telly, from what I've seen before, can be fairly bad in the way it's presented, but how bad could BBC America be? It's BBC. It wasn't too bad for the first 20 minutes. There was no ad break for the first 20 minutes, but for the next 20 minutes, there was, I counted 5 ad breaks. And including between, I think, the penultimate and the last ad break, there was a 5-minute Doctor Who file where they showed interviews with Hermione Norris and Peter Capaldi before the episode had finished. So I'm not quite sure that this sort of thing is allowed, but my bonus favourite thing for Kill the Moon is loving the BBC and not having to worry about adverts, and for all the times we moan about the BBC, and for all the times that we get angry that we believe it's biased against our point of view. I would be very, very, very sad to lose it as it currently presents things. And yes, I hate it too, with the cornering up of credits and the desperate for you to watch the next show rather than appreciate those that have made the program that you just watched, or that you'd like to absorb and digest the ramifications of the drama you may have watched. Yes, there's all that wrong, but my God, what it could be is so much better. So it made me very thankful that I'm able to watch Doctor Who and indeed BBC programs in the way that I could. Bit of an unusual one there, but it was a personal one that brought it home to me when I watched Doctor Who on BBC America for the first time.
Yeah, well, no, funnily enough, I didn't get I didn't choose as my favourite thing about Kill the Moon the fact that John watched it on his honeymoon. Kill the honeymoon. And that in doing so, he had to watch it the American way and appreciate the way that we get fed our media by the BBC. Actually, John's recording there was made before Nadine Dorries was made Culture Secretary, which, for those of you that don't know, because maybe you're a listener not based in the UK, it's basically like putting the bull in charge of the china shop, except, at least the bull, can be let off not knowing what China is. And the BBC is under threat from people whose motives I think are disingenuous, and you can, as I do, as John suggests there, dislike much of the way that the BBC conducts itself. I think some of the biggest mistakes the BBC makes is in actually trying to defer to those who would want it to be run by market forces, or those who are predisposed to be against it anyway. And I think they should do exactly the opposite. In fact, I think they should do what Clara and Courtney do in Kill the Moon, which is actually, if they see that their critics are wrong, is actually go, well, we have the courage of our convictions because we are a public service broadcaster run by people who are trained in the areas of making quality television. That's not necessarily television that is a slave to market forces. And actually, that's how you discover things that are unlikely successes, because all of their ingredients would say they shouldn't work, and yes they do, yet they do. That's when the magic happens, and that can only happen if you're not constantly being driven by commercial concerns. But that's a different argument, but I just think it's worth saying, because we have somebody now who I think has vested interests because they're allies who political allies whose motivations I do not trust, to be perfectly frank, would like to remove a good quality competitor, and as a result we would get inferior product. Much of it's odd that a lot of these people claim to be very patriotic, and yet one of the greatest things and amongst the greatest entertainment that this country has been produced by a body that they would like to do away with or sell down the river. So again, their claims of patriotism I find slightly disingenuous. I think it's a patriotism that is more due to a worshipping of the wallet of certain individuals who would profit very much by the dismantling of the BBC. But I don't think that would be to this country's cultural advantage. And how many of our great TV series and great exports were not made under a public broadcasting remit, which I think, by the way that it is designed, if it is used properly, and as I say, I have big problems with much of how the BBC is run at the moment, but I think that's because they're misjudging how to justify themselves and what they stand for. But the public service model, I think, produces more interesting and good quality stuff than market forces do, because also the market can get skewed and is not the even battleground that its advocates necessarily characterize it as being. But no, I didn't get that, because it's not really a bonus thing, John. What it is if it's a 4-parter, you choose a thing from each episode and a bonus thing. But this isn't a 4-parter. This is a new series episode where you just choose 5 things. But all right, accepted. Now he's done a lovely visual with some music that will be used on the YouTube video. But I wonder if he's got a goodbye or anything else. Let's have a look.
So thank you very much for your time. And a quick plug on things I do. As I said at the beginning, I am a writer on TV and film. You can find some of my work in various BFI booklets, in their recently released Blu-rays. You can find them in Tony Richardson's Mademoiselle, David Green's I Start Counting, and Short Sharp Shocks Volume 2. So if you want to learn all about short films, very obscure films that were shown in the days when there was like short, not just shorts before the main feature, but an entire pre-film program, then you'll find much to enjoy there. I also, again, as I said at the beginning, I co-host with my friend, the writer Howard David Ingham, Nigel Neal podcast, Bergcast. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts, or you can just type in Bergcast and look at the website, which also has some viewing notes and some links. And we have some very good guests, including Toby, who's my first ever guest, talking about the original iteration of the Great Mass Experiment. We've also had people like Stephen Volk and Samir Ahmed and Mark Gatiss, either talking about a Nigel Neal production or about a writer who talks about the influence of Nigel Neal on their career. I also do another podcast on the Italian subgenre giallo with my friend Dave Thomas, called Due Signore and Giallo, in which he curates a selection of giallo films chronologically listed, and I go through and ask questions, very much like a Doctor Who companion, like, why is there not a plot? This is a bit problematic, isn't it? And do we have to keep cutting back to the bloke having his face ripped off by rocks as he falls off a cliff? So if you're interested in that, you can check that out as well. I have a blog, viewsfromahill.com, where I write, and I've also written for Horrified magazine, Curious British Television, and some pieces on Play for Today for Royal Holloway's Forgotten Television Project's 50th anniversary for Play for Today, which was out last year. So I hope there's some interest in that, and thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be involved in these podcasts. They're a real oasis in the lockdown desert, and I hope that once things return to whatever normality may look like post pandemic, they still continue, as they've been a real boon for me, and I know for so many. So thank you, Toby, and for everyone at home for listening or watching, and happy times and places.
Oh, bless you, John. Well, actually, you weren't to know, because the schedule for these is decided fairly arbitrarily, but this is recorded just as we're sort of emerging out of lockdown. In fact, I have just been for my first meal in a restaurant in 2 years, because my partner is still shielding, but she's actually away this week, so I can afford to, go out and be amongst the great unwashed without potentially coming back and infecting her. Obviously, I've taken precautions so as not to infect myself either, but I have to be double careful with her because she's still very vulnerable. How so? But anyway, so John was recording that at the height of lockdown, but we've proved that life finds a way. There are other challenges right now, and I'm sure challenges will continue to be thrown at us, which is why I will persist with whatever value this has. If you're listening, hopefully you find this at best interesting and fun, and at worst diverting, or a reason to just be grateful you're not as bad as the guy that presents that cloying, name-dropping, often non-sequitur filled sequitur, not sequitur. There's no sequiturs either. It's not a gardening podcast, but you know what I mean. Anyway, yeah. We're coming out of lockdown, but I hope Jon hasn't had to wait too long to hear his contribution. As I say, I've got a lot of these, the contributions from guests in the can, and I tend to just sort of choose the stories based on either what I fancy or I try and mix up the doctors at the very least. But with this one, I waited because we were going to see if we could complete Peter's contribution, and it may be that in the show description, I will still see and talk to Peter, and it may be that I get to discover what his number 4 thing is. So then I may re-edit this or add something to the end, or just put it in the show description.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
I think you'll find Peter Harness is at my house, and he's going to tell me what the 4th thing is.
My 4th thing is when they turn all the lights off, because it's really I like it, and it's about kind of democracy and that, isn't it? And Stephen thought it was really good because it was very impactful and very cheap.
So that's that mystery solved. Thanks, Peter. So that was nice, wasn't it? Thanks to Peter. So at last minute, I was literally due to release this in about 5 days, and Peter happened to be passing through, and we caught up. Do you know what I mean? And then I just as he was going, I went, actually, can we have thing 4 now? So that was thing 4, which was the lights going out. Now, Jon chose reneging on the public vote. I chose throwing it open to the public. I don't think either of those are quite all the lights going out, are they? Peter specifically chose it because of the effect and what it did, and of course Stephen Moffat's descriptor of it as being effective and cheap. So I don't think that gives either of us an extra point, in which case we both, Jon and I, have one of Peter's things, and also I still have two of Jon's. So that hasn't helped me at all. But anyway, it's nice for completeness' sake, isn't it? I think you'll find. Thanks to Peter Harness, writer of the episode we've been discussing. Thanks to Jon Dear, who is a lovely fellow whose podcast, his Creative Mass podcast, is great, and do seek out his other stuff. He's really working hard to get the work of Nigel Neal out there and appreciated in the way that it should be. So thanks to them both. I like them both very much, and I hope you liked meeting them via this podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and I shall speak to you in the next of these happy times and places. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest this time around was Jon Dear, who can be found on Twitter at According to Jon D. According to Jon D. Jon Dear, Jon, by the way. And he's also got a podcast called Bergcast, which is on Twitter at Bergcast Calling, B-E-R-G, cast calling. I'd like to thank my patrons too, who include Jon and indeed this episode's other contributor, the mighty Peter Harness. Lovely fellows both. And thanks to them as well as the patrons I'm about to name: Stephen White, Andrew Wilson, Andrew Willis, Michael Williams, Rich Wiggins, Adam Westwood, Gary Wales, Apollo C. Vermouth, Reynard Toombs, Sabrina Tilabassi, Nick Temple, Neil Tate, and Len Stewart. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Oh, I always cut it a bit fine with that music, don't I? But it's because I want to mention the patrons, to whom I am very, very grateful indeed. They really do help. I'm self-employed, and the patronage enables me to spend a bit of time to do these properly, retake mistakes and, try and make sure that everything's a sort of broadcast quality and that sort of thing. I mean, in terms of technical stuff, in terms of the content, I'm afraid you're just stuck with me wittering on, which I'm not sure anybody would broadcast, which is why it has to be a podcast. But hey, those people who are kind enough to support have done so at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, where for as little as £3 a month, they get named on the podcasts. They also get bonus material, advanced releases. They will have heard this particular episode of Happy Times and Places 6 months before you if you are a non-patron, and they get earlier releases of the Too Much Information podcasts and the Indefinable Magic ones as well, and they also get an exclusive podcast called Far Too Much Information, which has even more arcana than Too Much Information. And that's, as I say, on my Patreon page. £3 a month is the lowest tier. They do go up, and there are other goodies as the increments rise, but most things are available at the lowest tier. I couldn't bear to deny people things. So, and that lowest tier can even get 10% off it. All the tiers can, if you sign up for a year in one go. There's a 10% discount. But I understand that could be really daunting, just, committing to a monthly thing as times get increasingly tough. I understand that. I do have a Ko-fi page, kofi.com/Toby Hadoke, for the occasional one-off payment, as and when you can do that, if you feel so inclined. But, as I say, I know times are tough, and they're getting tougher for everybody. So I'm just grateful to you, for listening and for being there. It's nice to talk to you. And do, comment along on Twitter, say hello, all that sort of stuff. But if you do enjoy them, I'd be grateful if you could go to iTunes or to Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts and give me a much-needed 5-star rating. That really helps with the passing trade. And a few lines of review so that people wandering past get an idea of what these are about and what it is you like about them, if like them you do. And I hope you do. That would be really, really helpful, and it just helps to separate me from the crowd. And there is a big crowd of Doctor Who-related podcasts and, some really good stuff out there. So any help is much appreciated. I'm just looking at the timer. This is an hour and 50 minutes long. How the hell have I... The episode's only 42 minutes. How the hell have I got an extra hour's chitter-chatter? God, you're patient. Well, thanks. I'm also a comedian and have a comedy club called Excess Malarkey at Excess Malarkey, which is in Manchester, and it's on every Tuesday at 8 p.m. at the Breadshed in Manchester. Excess Malarkey Comedy Club. It's award-winning. It's been going for 24 years, and it also has an online presence at twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. That is where we get our monthly show out there on the first Sunday of every month at 8 p.m. And there's an archive of past performances of all the brilliant comedians we've had at Excess Malarkey. I think you've had plenty. I don't think you need a post-credits bit. Otherwise, we'll be here forever, and some of you will literally die of old age listening to this. So, go away. But nicely. I'm not being mean. I'm grateful to you for listening and being there. But yeah, sod off in the nicest possible way.